And here's Michael.
A lot of people wonder why I'm so normal.
um, you you mentioned before um, that you went through a vetting process. You This must not have been the first time that people came to you and your siblings to say we want to make a movie about your dad. What was this mm, particular design that made it you say this is it?
I there were several overtures made to the family about doing a doc on Norman, and um, usually would just sort of break down on what their take was or how they were planning on doing it in a 2 hour time frame. Because as you can see, there's so much in his life that you can almost make a movie out of every subject, be it feminism, be it the war novel, be it the '60s, the March on the Pentagon. What impressed me with Jeff was not only his understanding of Norman's work, because believe it or not, we were approached by a few directors who hadn't really read him, which I thought was a red flag. um, I thought Jeff's idea of coming up with these chapter headings, of these sort of psychological chapter headings, and sort of telling the story through that structure was really kind of brilliant and unusual.
You said before, reminded a little bit of Norman's writing
Yeah, well,
rhythmically.
Jeff's father was a pretty well known musician, and his there's a staccato beat throughout this film. It's very fast paced. It's a lot of fast cutting, and the music in it is quite, um, I think, reflective of the cutting style. And much of my dad's writing was had this kind of staccato beat to it, this frenzied, feverish quality. And I thought he was able to filmically capture that quite well.
And what kind of archive? What was the archive like that you provided? You gave him because the material, the archival material, are incredible. Some must have been yours and never shared.
Yeah, I mean, I actually I don't know how I ended up with it, but I have a box of um, 8 millimeter film. That's I haven't gone through all of it, but I gave a bunch to Jeff. I mean, there's in terms of like the television archives, the given the volume of interviews that he did, I think he had a small army just combing through all of it. I mean, that in of itself was inspiring.
And there is something in the film. I had the honor of seeing one of his last, I think, live appearances at Lincoln Center, and for a screening of Tough Guy Don't Dance. And it struck me even then, it was late in life, this incredible energy and sort of the fact that you could see him thinking as he was speaking. There was nothing rehash. I mean, it's an older movie, and this idea, this belief in the power of intellect. And I think it's very, it just through the film you see that.
Yeah, he was always looking for truth, whether it was, through discovering beauty or ugliness, and he wasn't afraid to pierce the veil to find it. I mean, I think I was just talking to my friend Adam, as the credits were playing, about how prophetic so many of his ideas are. I mean, in terms of what we're living with now. I mean, just the idea that he made a movie portraying a pornographic director running for president says it all. But I just think we've become the society that's so locked into this like circular logic, where this obtuse thought has been essentially reinforced by groupthink. And of course, he was antithetical to groupthink, which is why he was the contrarian, and he was obviously made a lot of mistakes in pursuing the contrarian point of view. But I don't think you can ever arrive at truth without understanding the opposite of it.
It's very interesting because there is a profound difference, I think, between the contrarian and polarization. So it's still the opposite, but contrarian is an original thought, while polarization is just the lack, the absence of.
Yeah, I think the difference is, as long as you're a contrarian of ideas and not ideology, you're keeping the debate alive, keeping people alive, literally and figuratively, certainly creatively and intellectually. But unfortunately, it's like every time I've seen this movie many times, but I always get something out of it. But the Town Bloody Hall, which actually Giulia and I were talking about Pennybaker and Leacock, who were the camera teams on these underground movies that he made, also filmed Town Bloody Hall, which is, you saw the clips of them at with the feminist debate, and their series was called The Theater of Ideas. Where now would you go to see Theater of the Ideas? It's like a lost artifact. It fills me with melancholy when I think about it.
We actually screened. Hillary probably remembers when we were raising money for the cinema, and Pennybaker was a big supporter. They were very vocal about the cinema being saved and resuscitated, and so there's a lot of filmmakers offered to come and talk about their work. And the first, when I asked Penny and Chris, what do you want to do? They want to do Town Bloody Hall, and we had a blast, and there is almost an erotic energy that goes on in that room, when they're all attacking him, and there is this sort of just real sense of how exciting ideas, back and forth are, and it's true. It's sad that you don't have that.
No, you don't. I mean, Norman's debates with William F. Buckley were like they sold out, small stadiums. I mean, people were just engaged by ideas, conflicting ideas, and it just, I've lived long enough to experience a taste of that. But for people like my son and his friends, I don't know what kind of world they're going to be inheriting, but I'm not feeling optimistic.
As a producer yourself, did you ever consider making a film about him?
I actually recently did an adaptation of The Fight, which is a book about his relationship with Muhammad Ali in Kinshasa, leading up to and shortly after the Rumble in the Jungle, which was Ali's bout with George Foreman, and is to this day considered one of the great sporting events of the 20th century. So it's actually a film that I want to make.
You haven't made that yet.
Yeah.
I also want to acknowledge here in the room someone that has worked with Norman Mailer, and is Lana Jokel. She's in the film, and she edited Maidstone. And I was wondering if Lana wants to say something about actually working with Mailer. No, Ivana, can you bring a microphone? Yeah.
The seat is yours now.
We have another seat that's ready.
So, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I actually started at Pennybaker because Penny's the one who taught me how to sync up footage and everything in the late 60s. And so once I learned how to sync up footage and everything, Norman was working there, and he just finished filming Beyond the Law. And he actually asked myself and Jan, who's another editor, to edit Beyond the Law. And I had, to that point, I've only been at Pennybaker's for a couple of months, so I was very new in terms of editing. So I did that, and then afterwards he was in the process of going to film Maidstone, and by then he said, he wants all his friends and ex-wives and lovers and children in the film, and he asked if I should be in the film too. And I said, well, I couldn't because I had to go back to Brazil to see my family. in the summer, but I'll be happy to edit it. He said, great, we'll wait for you to come back and Jack can edit Maidstone also. So what happened was when I was an editor, he had a lot of respect for me. It wasn't like, well, first of all, he thought I gave out the impression of being very serious and perhaps rather aloof. And actually, I was very shy. So when I was working with them, I was very serious. And in those days, the guys were always coming around, to the editing room and kind of over your shoulder and trying to give you a massage. So I put a note on the door saying, "Editor working, do not disturb." So then Norman told his pals, his kind of rat pack pals, he had his own little rat pack, and he said, "Don't touch her, she's working for us." And anyway, so during the editing, he would come into the editing room, and we'd talk about a certain scene, and he was so articulate, he would go on and on, thinking out loud almost, the scene, and I would just kind of listen, and then at the end of it, I would say, well, Norman, you are so articulate, there's no way I could say anything. I said, but I think I know something that I would like to try. So he said, fine, try your way. He was very giving, very generous, and he's, so, and then I would edit the scene and he would come back to look at it. But there was no real format to how to weave the film together, so it was kind of a cinema verite style, but it was most interesting to watch him, how he thinks and try to get into his head, which is always difficult. But anyway, after we finished editing the film Maidstone, which was very exciting to work on that, later on, he took me to dinner a couple of times. He was very respectful. And I asked him, I said, why did you hire me, because I had no experience in editing. He said, for your instinct and your nimble oriental fingers. And his wrinkled, twinkling blue eyes. So that's good. So, we kept a friendship all those years. Didn't see him too much, but here and there, we see him in New York. And the last time I saw him was at Lincoln Center when he showed Good Guys.
Tough Guy Don't Dance.
And so he was old, and after the screening, he came on stage to a Q&A and had a talk. And he was with two canes. He had a hard time kind of moving around. So when the Q&A was finished, I jumped onto the stage, and I said hello to him, and he was so happy to see me. He tried to get up from his chair to come. I said, no, Norman. He said, okay, I'll come. He said, no, and then he came and introduced me to Michael London, who was his biographer. He said, well, this is Lana Jokel. She's our editor on Maidstone Beyond the Law, and isn't she lovely, And anyway, that was the last I remember him. And he said, why don't you come have dinner with us? A small group of us come to O'Neill's. I said, great, I'll meet you there. And unfortunately, I thought O'Neill was on the west side, but at that point, O'Neill was no longer on the west side. I moved to the east side, so I actually never made it in. But it was such wonderful memory I have of Norman. I think he treated me with lots of respect, and I always say, I'm an old-fashioned Chinese girl, so.
Michael, in the film, I think it's one of your sister that says one of the things that he tried, cinema was I think he really wanted to make and succeed at. How would you describe his relationship with film as opposed to literature?
Well, I think, his notion of film was really he thought film had tremendous power on the subconscious, that it was sort of an interplay between memory and subconscious, and how that would express itself. There there are any number of things that I think turned him on about film. One is that writing is a very solitary business. You're with yourself for many hours a day, and it's just you and the pen or the pencil, and you're writing. Whereas film, you're creating something with an army of people. And it's intensely collaborative. It's also intensely existential because you really, there's a line in the movie that refers to, life, not knowing how life is going to turn out or how any one given thing you might be doing will turn out. Making a movie is very much like that. I mean, you can have the best of intentions, the best script, the best actors, the best director, and you just have no idea not only how any particular day is going to turn out, but how ultimately the film itself will turn out. And so you're living in that existential moment day by day, and I think that was very exciting to him.
Raise your hand if you have questions. Oh, there is just one there.
Michael, I was just thinking,
Hold on.
listening to all you kids talk so lovingly about him. I mean, I think in addition to everything else, he seemed like a great father, or was he not? I know it's complicated, but
yeah, I mean, listen, before he died, he said to me, I could not have been the writer that I am today and have been more of a father to you. And I said, that's okay, Dad. I'll take quality over quantity. When he was with me, he was always very present. And I know he loved me. I mean, he wasn't, he was of that generation that would, I think he may have actually enunciated that word once or twice, but you felt it. His presence was always there. So I feel blessed that I had him as a father. There are certainly parts of my life that I wish had turned out a little bit differently growing up. But he was just, immensely present, and that's sort of what you can ask for, I think, in any kind of father-son, father-daughter relationship.
There's one here. Hold on for the mic so that we can hear you better.
Thank you. I was interested in his relationship to alcohol, and we saw that pretty intensely in toward the beginning, and then we saw him have a drink, before he died. I was wondering what the middle part was like.
He enjoyed booze. It's so funny because I was sort of born in the middle, right? I'm the middle child. One of the reasons I like watching this film is that I don't really know the man who existed before all that well. So every time I see this film, I learn a little bit more about him. But by the time I was born, he was a very different person. He wasn't that kind of raging alcoholic, letting loose the inner beast kind of person. So I don't, I mean, he'd have a couple cocktails at dinner or, a bottle of wine, but I never saw him drunk, if that's really the question you're asking. So I'm tipsy, but not drunk.
It's on here.
I really enjoyed the film because it's a testimony of a very complicated and larger than life artist and a very loving family in the end. It was almost as if each child had his own childhood, but the end of the movie was so moving when all the children were united, and this film is a testimony to the family. And I just wanted to ask, did Norris Church unite the kids? Was that true? Was she really a good influence on your father and on the family and bringing it back together closer?
Yes. She was, and I did not envy her task, dealing with all of us, because some of us were still quite young at the time and rambunctious, and my prior stepmother, who's, actually a lovely woman in her own right, she was just not into playing that role at all. And, it was just, I never felt that comfortable hanging out, in the house when she was there. But Norris was pretty, I mean, she was young, so she could relate to us. And, we'd spend all the month of August in Maine. And, every day was an adventure, whether it was, hiking Mount Katahdin or going on some reckless sailing trip where we always wondered if he'd come back alive. But she was a very good stepmother and very kind to us.
What is your relationship with his books? How's do you see the evolution of his books, and what's closer to you?
What's closer to me in terms of
in the books? Yeah, yeah.
You mean in terms of what my favorite book
Yeah.
is? Well, I a lot of ideas I was exposed to through reading his books, probably at age younger than most people experience those ideas. So it was, I learned about sex through the Executioner song. Just the passages of Gary Gilmore with Nicole, his love at the time, were so like mindfully or mind-blowingly transcendental that, and the passages of their lovemaking was so beyond any comprehension I might have had, that it was just sort of thrilling to read. I remember just being, wow, I can't believe my dad wrote this. I think, obviously the fight is something I've been marinating on because I'm, wanting to make it into a film. But I think my favorite book, honestly, is The Deer Park. Because it's so, the characters are just so rich, and the milieu is so rich and tortured, and it's about old Hollywood and these exiled filmmakers in Palm Springs, and trying to sort of figure out how to make a comeback because it's right in the heat of the McCarthy era, and they've all been listed. So it's I just love the milieu of that book.
And as kids, how were you exposed? How much were you exposed to his public image? The most contentious one, and how was it negotiated?
Well, when I was a kid, I was living in Cape Cod year round, and I didn't see that much of my dad. So I was always kind of like in awe of this guy who would come in every so often and spend a little bit of time with us and then disappear. But I had no sense of like, the stabbing is like exists in another lifetime that doesn't involve me, and so it's always hard for me to watch that because it's really not the man that I knew. I think the older you get, the more aware you become of someone's idiosyncrasies. We're all idiosyncratic, and I think children have this idealization of their parents until they become a teen or a preteen. They sort of figure it out that they're not so perfect. I think my exposure came a little bit sooner than the norm.
What do you think? It's the film has explored so many avenues. It's just like this is my second time where I saw it, and the first time I see it big, and it makes a difference. It's even more powerful. But what do you think is the truest part? Facets of the film. It's a lot in there. And what are the things that you really recognize the most in the ideas put forth?
Well, I think, it really captures his essence of someone who was always sort of probing himself and pushing things and trying to find what the meaning of life is, what the point is, right? And it's this just kind of relentless, energetic thrust into the unknown. I think the film does a pretty good job of capturing that, capturing his ideas, and the fact that he really wasn't. He wasn't afraid to fall down on a sword, and we all know from watching this film that happened quite often. But I think what inspires me is just to have that courage and to have that drive and that will, and then also not to feel so inadequate with your own daily life. When you see something like that, because it really is. I mean, it's extraordinary. I mean, he did have just tremendous energy and was very disciplined. I wish I had a tenth of that, frankly.
Did you? It's underlined in the in the film, but a lot of the thing he said or he was thinking aloud turned out to be rather prophetic. And and I remember some of the later, the last interviews he gave. I think it was New York Magazine. There was certain things about China, certain things about the country becoming softer and spoiled. And did you assess? Could you see that kind of visionary dimension of what he was saying? That sort of the desire to anticipate what was.
Yeah, I mean, I said to him, "Why are you always so critical of the country?" And he said, "Because I love the country. Indifference is the enemy of love, not hate. Hate is an emotion. Indifference is the lack of emotion, and a much more profound form of malaise." I mean, listen, I think we all feel that his prophecies are very alive and threatening. He said to me once, this country at any given time is 50.1% good and 49 point something, bad. And that scale can slide either way very easily. And his fear of fascism, of totalitarianism, was ever present in his prophecies. And, as I said, we're going through a very odd time in this country, and who knows how it's going to turn out.
Do you miss? And I know this is a very generic question, but I personally I do, and I come from a different country. The fact that intellectuals, I mean writers, they don't have a more dominant role. They're not engaged in public life in a way that it's actually real. It's a little one-liners, but this respect for artists and intellectuals as forces to advance society.
I mean, I think the problem with being an artist in today's age is that everyone's living in fear of cancellation, and so you really can't. Very few people are willing to take on the establishment, to take on groupthink, and say, "This is my opinion, and it's radically different from yours," without being terminated. And I consider myself a paleo liberal. But I think the left, has given the cancellation on the left, the political correctness on the left has actually given the right the freedom to start banning books, which is what's happening now in our libraries all across the country. I mean, it's terrifying what's going on. And so I don't know. I'm feeling pessimistic these days. And the role of the artist is to bring us out of that pessimism and to challenge us, to make us think for ourselves. And I don't see that many people stepping up to the plate. I mean, there's no, writing as a cultural phenomenon is disappearing. I mean, there are no, who's the great writer of our generation, of my generation at this point, or the younger generations, frankly. I don't know. There's not, it's impossible to make a living as a writer. So it's just, we're living in a very kind of culturally stultifying era. And that does not bode well, because of the role of the artist is to really shake things up. And that's just not happening.
Sure.
Do you think that Norman was rather prophetic at the end, what he said about the country compared to what's happening?
Yes, I do. And I'm, I think it's a clarion call, this film to some extent about, where things can go. So I think people are hungry.
Yeah, I think people are hungry. So we have time for one more if there is one. If not, we're have to finish this. Okay, we are to finish this. I think the slightly pessimistic and prophetic thing is a good way to leave it. Exactly. To leave it at.